On today's episode of 6-1 Forward, I'm joined by Brian Suter, the very first developer on the podcast. Thank you for being here, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
When we met,
hmm
I remember when it was. The first time we actually had the chance to sit down in front of each other was at an SMPS event.
hmm
And it was one of those round tables, and
Oh, yeah,
you
that's right.
were one of the round table people.
That's right.
And at that time, you were with Kaufman,
hmm
and I think Gravity was still conceptual, maybe?
Yeah, I think that was probably about right. Do you have any idea, recollection of what year was?
I mean, that would have pre-COVID, I want to say, was it 17, 18, 17?
It could have been, yeah. I think when I started at Kaufman, it was in probably the middle of 2016, and we were just starting to sit down and do some of the plans for that. I remember like my first day there, we were looking at one of the original concepts for Gravity was what looked like what now is Apple's headquarters, the big circle donut kind of thing. And I remember the first day sitting there, and as like Brett Kaufman just like basically said, no, we're gonna go do something entirely different. And so from that, obviously, it changed into some of the stuff that's been developed as of today.
So you were part of that, but prior to that project, how did were you at another place in Columbus, or was that your first place? How did you get to Columbus, and what was your
Yeah.
trajectory?
I went to school in upstate New York. From there, I went just sort of happenstance. Ended up working for a guy that was an alumni of my college. Worked for him in Cleveland at a big real estate investment trust for about 8 years, 9 years, up until 2009. Got laid off in 2009, like everybody else did, and then started a consulting business and did some consulting for a while, and then ended up getting hired for a private family that was based in Manhattan to help run their real estate in the Southeast. And so I was based in New Orleans for 3 years. Yeah. So I got to report back to the home office in Manhattan, but was based in New Orleans running real estate in Florida and Mississippi and Louisiana and Texas. And so I was there for a little while, and I had met a girl in Cleveland after I got out of college, and moved her down to New Orleans. And then a few years later, she was like, I think I'd better be a little closer to home. So we started looking back, coming back to the Midwest, and ended up in Columbus, just sort of by happenstance. Had a buddy that was working at another big real estate investment trust here in town, and gotten connected with those guys. And so ended up working for Michael Glimcher at what was Glimcher at the time.
Oh,
And then as things started to change and transition around, I started working for Brett Kaufman in 2016.
2016.
Yeah.
And you guys, back then and still, but I remember you guys were like the coolest kids because you had Jessica and Ian, and
We're not still the
you're
coolest
still
kids.
the cool kids.
Right.
But back then, you guys were, 10 years ago, you were the youngest group.
Yeah. Yeah.
You guys were all part of this visionary project.
Yep.
You guys were doing really cool things.
Yeah, there was lightning in a bottle there for a little
Yeah.
while. It was really kind of incredible. The people around the room were the best part about the entire thing. I mean, we got to develop some unbelievable projects, and got to really have impact in the city. But at the same time, the people that you're doing it with was super cool. It's
That's
like fun
awesome.
to go in the office.
So, how long was it from conceptual until breaking ground that Gravity
Oh
was?
man, so I think there's Gravity. There's phase 1, 2, and 3.
Right.
Let's see, it started in 2016, and then started coming out of the ground just a few later. So the first phase was probably 2019, and then it was probably open in 2021 or so. And I'm making these things up as I go in my head. That
Sure.
seems probably a little bit earlier than that, but that's probably right. It's plus or minus 18 months in development and then 18 months in construction.
When you look back on it now, or when you're over at Junto, let's say,
Yeah.
do you look at it and think that you were part of one of the most cutting edge projects in the city, or how do you see it now?
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting question to ask. I mean, it's definitely nice to have that legacy, but at the same time, I anticipated or hoped that Franklinton would have a little bit more of a comeuppance since then. Not to say that there isn't a great vibe and a great culture in Franklinton, but there's still sort of the gap in between what is Gravity and sort of the base of Franklinton, and it really ends up being, there's a Franklinton East,
Yeah.
West, South, and North now, and I mean it's just sort of divided up the neighborhood more than I anticipated. So, that comes with my own, some of my own faults as well. I mean, some of the designs that we ended up doing for Gravity 1, 2, and 3, didn't necessarily lend itself well to the rest of the neighborhood. And so some of those things are just sort of embedded in the design. But I still hope that, Franklinton sort of gets that momentum going again.
It's kind of wild to think about, especially now that it's what is it 10 years old, phase one? Right around?
Yeah, that's
How's
probably
that
right.
even possible?
Yeah, that's probably right. Maybe not quite that again, probably 8 years into it, but yeah, it's pretty close.
So then you
I'm
leave.
just saying that like before. I'm gonna stop here for a second just to make sure that's like I can't believe that's the case.
Is that true? That it's actually
Yeah, so it was we started construction in 2017, 18, opened in 19. So we're 8 years into it, plus or minus. That's
wow.
wild. I'm older than I thought I was.
Well, there's COVID in there, and I think that's
Yeah,
what does
yeah,
it too. Is
yeah.
like all of a sudden that whole 5 years, 4 years,
Right, right.
just it's like a time warp.
Yeah, and it's hard for me at COVID at this point. This is wild. COVID, I heard on NPR as I was driving in that they started hearing about closures in Wuhan like 6 years ago last week. And
Crazy.
I'm like, holy cow, that's 6 years. Like,
But also 600 years ago,
right, totally right.
right?
I think it's warped our sense of time, which is why sometimes I'm like,
I don't know what's
I don't
happening.
know what day it is. I don't know what year, project I did when.
It's funny because, we recorded with Yogi last week and we were talking about the same thing and how there was a shift for each of us, I think, all of us, but
Yeah.
how he and I feel like we've maybe aged quite a bit during
Yeah.
that time
Yes.
when we weren't anticipating. We would have gradually slowed down, but we were abruptly stopped and it was really hard to ramp back up in a lot of ways after that.
Totally right.
I don't know
Yeah.
if you feel that too.
Yeah, I mean, it was just such an odd occasion for so many people. I think that there's some bonding experience. I mean, it's like, not that I've ever done this, but people going to war say that there's some amount of bonding that happens in the trenches, and now everybody has a commonality between
That's right.
COVID, which again, not that there's a good thing or a bad thing that comes with that, but at least now there's some commonality between all humans that there wasn't necessarily before. It wasn't good for most people, though.
That's right.
Right.
That's the long and short of it
Yes,
right there.
Right. Yeah, and at the time, actually, we were gravity basically COVID put Gravity 2 basically on the back burner. Right as it started, we were starting to go out for financing for it, and it was impossible at that point. And so COVID put a massive slowdown on real estate in general.
Yeah.
But Gravity specifically was a challenging one to come out of.
So you see Gravity open and you see what it is, and then from there, your trajectory and your path changes again.
Yeah, so I mean, I spent 5 years with Brett, and I managed all of his commercial development stuff, and then sometimes his construction, and sometimes some of the leasing. And so it's interesting. We had projects that were out in the suburbs. We had partnerships with the Green Bay Packers.
I remember
We
that.
were working on projects downtown. We were working on Gravity, and all that stuff was sort of building up to this culmination of Gravity, and also what is now known as Greenhouse, which is out. Which is up in the short north. All this stuff was sort of culminating to this sort of like big, wave of development, and then COVID hit, and so, had to sort of put the brakes on things for a while. And I think there was a variety of, we didn't know what was going to happen to the world. We didn't know what was going to happen to these projects, and so sort of put everybody sort of slowed down for a little while. And it was ultimately all the projects that we had were at a point that there wasn't really much work for me to do. We had gotten them to the point where they were ready to get financed and or like, far into construction. And so Brett was like, hey, we're going to have a little bit of a slowdown period. And I totally understood that, but that's not necessarily the way that my body or my mind works. And so I'd been talking to a couple other friends about starting some other projects outside of Brett and outside of Kaufman. And so we started to really sort of lean into that at the beginning of COVID. And so ultimately just jumped ship from Kaufman and sort of hung my own shingle, as they say.
Which has been, as your friend and as a colleague in a lot of ways, to watch all the different projects you're part of.
Yeah.
Both in the city of Columbus and outside of, and one of them we're sitting in today. And I'm
Yes.
curious
Yeah.
about the story here. So we
Yeah.
are at the Mill on Flax.
That's right.
And you're the very first developer that's been on the podcast on 6-1 Forward. So I would love to hear from you and kind of have you walk us through. You found a site, and how long ago was that? And what is the story of what it takes and what it took to make this place and space real?
Yeah.
A lot?
It took twice as long and twice as much money. It's
There
sort of
you
the
go.
classic development story. I was working with Tom Vetter and Brendan Palma, who are the two principals at River West Partners, and they had their own investment and pipeline of RV parks and single family homes and duplexes all over Columbus, but also the surrounding area. And so they had a bunch of single family and multifamily properties around Delaware. And this was probably 7 or 8 years ago, even starting. And so they knew the area really well. And then them being friends with me, we started to connect and talking about really starting up a development pipeline for their business, and came across this site. It was a big sort of industrial site, mostly unused, had a couple old buildings on it, that had been vacant for probably 4 or 5 years, was owned by an out-of-state investment company that owned a huge amount of real estate all over the world. And so we knew that the city had been interested in seeing this being redeveloped. And so we had been approached by the city, and we had also gone and started to really try to track down the owners of this. And it sort of worked out in this culmination of perfect timing where the city was ready to see a development happening over here. The city of Delaware had started to really explode in terms of population, as did Delaware County, and this developer was, or the owner was interested in getting rid of the property. It happened that the first time we called him, we're like, hey, we want to buy this property in Delaware, and started to sort of talk to him about it. He's like, I don't understand. Like, let me get on Google. And he was thinking we were talking Delaware, the state, not the city. And so we had to, it was just one of those ideas of us being so focused on this little piece of land in Delaware and not having sort of a rationalization. This guy was like a bigwig somewhere,
Sure.
thinking about Delaware, the state. Anyway, so we went through the process. We got the property under not ownership, but we had control of it, and then started to go through with the city to get the entire thing rezoned. The process was super challenging, as they all are. There's not an easy development these days, and this one was not necessarily overly hard, but it wasn't an easy one. The city was great partners. We had great financing partners, great development partners, equity partners, everybody, but it just took a long time. We hit some challenges with the financing market. We had some challenges just with the overall, site plan and making, the pro forma work. And then ultimately, getting construction has surprisingly been the easiest part, which has been great. Typically, once you get your shovels on the ground, you find things that are horrible disasters that you never anticipated, but this one was a good one. So, so we're sitting basically walking distance from the city of Delaware, Sandusky Street, which is its main spine. We're sitting 10 minutes away from it, walking distance. It's 162 apartments, 10,000 square feet of commercial space, some of which we're sitting in right now. The building that we're sitting in right now is 160 years old.
It's beautiful.
So it started out as an original a mill for flax seed mill, and then got converted into a tent factory at some point and was producing tents for the Civil War, and then a chair factory and all kinds of stuff. And so it's interesting to sit here. I've walked through this space for going on 6 years at this point, and to imagine and remember what it was before and what it is now is kind of incredible.
I think the thing that people may not always recognize or know, unless they're friends with a Brian Suter or work in this industry, these projects don't happen overnight. There's a lot of investment and a lot of time before we ever see a project like this see the light of day.
Sure.
And so I would love for you to kind of talk through when someone acquires land or has control of land and they have a vision for something. Is it on average 5 years before we actually see the project come to life?
Sure. Yeah. It's a great question. It's, ultimately dependent on the project and the complexity of it.
Sure.
This one took twice as long and twice as much money, but that's sort of the general rule of development, that it's just sort of the expectation. This one took probably longer than it really should have, but again, we had some uphill battles with COVID and some challenges in the financing and construction markets. But a project like this should probably take 18 months to get into in development and 18 months to build, plus or minus. But that still means that for a small developer like myself, you're not seeing dollars coming in for multiple years at a time. And while you're not getting money in, you're paying for consultants and you're paying for all of the work that goes into the work to get you to construction. And so it's a very risky business. I equate it oftentimes to like the VC business, that in each case VC companies come in and build a specific business, whatever line of industry that might be. Each one of these projects is an individual business. It's got its own marketing strategy. It's got its own location. It's got its own entitlement and development budget, and they're all individual businesses. in the case of a developer, it takes 5 or 6 years to build one of these things, and you might hit, a 5 or a 6 or maybe a 10x would be like a home run. You get 10 times your money back. But in the meantime, you've done 10 projects and you've gotten one home run, and all the others have been singles and doubles. And so they're just
That's right.
real. And in a lot of cases, out of those 10, 3 of them have failed.
Yeah.
And so the difference between VC and development is it takes a really long time to build these businesses. There's still, bricks and mortar. You still got to build them. And then our exit is never going to be 100x. It's never going to be that we make, $100 million on $1 million investment. And so that risk profile is much different. Again, it takes time. It takes time and money to build these. And it comes with, a certain kind of personality and person that wants to do that.
I mean, both of us have read, seen, talked about abatements and, the evil developer, and all of the developers are getting rich. And I think because I've been in real estate for so long and been around it so long, I don't subscribe to that. I don't understand that. I don't see that.
Sure.
I am often puzzled by that whole narrative when in one breath it's we need more houses, we need more housing. And then the next is the developers are so bad. The developers are so bad.
Sure, right.
And I'm curious in developer land with all of you, what your thoughts are when you hear that or how you all respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the word developer's gotten a bad name,
Yeah.
probably rightfully so, over the last 100 years. In a lot of cases, that was because development meant you knew somebody that was at ODOT, that knew where the next
That's
interchange
right.
was going to be, and there was some kind of, not that it was nefarious, it just was, that was the way that work was done. Development entitlements got to be were much easier. There wasn't nearly as much cost or infrastructure that's needed to be done. There wasn't issues nearly as much of people, neighborhoods not wanting development. And so there's just been a sort of a perfect storm of a lot of issues that have led up to now where development is no longer, I mean, surely there's some nefarious characters, but development is now just a job like anything else is. It is getting to be less and less of a job that smaller developers can do, like myself, only because it's so risky and the costs are so expensive up front that if you hit one or two of those projects that go sideways to begin with, I say this without qualms, it means bankruptcy in a lot of cases. And so, if your name is Suitor and it's not one of the others in town, it's much harder to get through. That said, I mean, going back to the abatements and the incentive conversation, they're absolutely critical. Development projects, construction projects are not going to happen.
That's right.
Whether it's in Delaware, city of Delaware, whether it's in Delaware County, or whether it's downtown in Columbus, without incentives. The cost of construction is too much. The cost of land is too much. The cost of infrastructure is too much. And the rents just aren't where they need to be in order to pay for those. And that's a huge amount of factors that come into that. However, if we need housing, it's going to have to be subsidized or helped with by the government entities. And whether that's, we're sitting in a place that has tax incentives. We got help from the state, the county, the city. Everybody put their hands into this project, or else it wouldn't have happened. And that's just the inevitability of the world that where we are today, that incentives are going to happen if we want to see development.
I think that's a really important point to make, is that in the absence of those, this project doesn't happen.
Yeah, by a long shot.
By a long shot. Projects across Central Ohio, no matter where they are, could potentially not be happening. And here, I think one of the other pieces that people don't know is parking.
Right.
And the cost per space.
Yeah.
And parking garages.
Yeah.
Here, when you're in some of the outlying areas, that conversation is a little bit different.
Sure.
But especially when you're back in the city of Columbus and you have to account for that. There are a lot of expenses and a lot of, if you want to talk about add-ons, that come into the project in a way that people may not see or recognize.
30% of any project is just the costs of getting through the permit process. That's tap fees. That's, all the fees that come along with permits and all of that work. 30% of any building or any house you're in is just the governmental oversight of it. And arguably that needs to happen. There are obviously other things that, there are ways that governments can help to find, and maybe it's not through tax incentives, but other ways to be able to help incentivize or find ways to help blighted or communities where it's not going to happen otherwise. And I'll say this, I think, there are some cases downtown that in Columbus that probably can have less subsidy or less incentive, but I'm not sure that anywhere in the city right now, at least in a residential or mixed use project, could do a project without some type of incentive.
Something.
Yep. Something.
Right.
And again, there's ways, I think, incentives or specifically incentives associated with taxes and offsetting tax income for incentive dollars. There are means to be able to do that without hurting the school system. So people often say, well, they're just taking money from the
That's
school
right.
system. And in some cases, they surely are. But in a lot of cases, there are things that you can pay back the school specifically for the dollars they're getting. And so, again, you're just offsetting where taxes are going elsewhere in the public realm. At the end of the day, it would be a great world to say that we don't need them or that we can do projects without them, but we can't. And so if the city wants as many housing units, regardless of where it is on the stack, it's just going to have to be a inevitability.
So I would love to know what you think the future of this area that we're sitting in looks like in 5 years or 10 years. What does this side of downtown Delaware look like to you as you look forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think this is part of the reason that we asked for. We went out and sought to get a transformational mixed-use tax credit from the state of Ohio. This was a tax credit that started about 5 or 6 years ago. This project was one of the first in the cadre of folks that got money. And this is a tax credit, meaning that once your project is built, you can basically submit a bunch of paperwork showing that your project did what it was supposed to do, and they'll reimburse you for that cash. And so this was a transformational project in this neighborhood, in this town.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is a lot of the incentive and a lot of the focus has been on the west side of the river. And this is on the east side of the river. And so as you drive around here, there's not as much infrastructure and there's not as many, the demographics are different between the two. And part of that is just because, again, cities build in different ways and people have to put focuses elsewhere. But because of the population growth in Delaware County and specifically in the city of Delaware, this is just an inevitability. It will be that, again, we're 10 minutes away from right downtown. People can live here and walk downtown, and you're surely not going to be able to buy a house downtown.
That's right.
And be this close. And so it brings a little bit of urbanity into, a little bit more of a suburban market. But we think this is a good kind of infill project to do that.
You're always listening and reading and keeping up on trends and future ideas and concepts. Curious what you think the future of development looks like, or how it changes in some of those areas that maybe help reduce costs or help speed up a process. Where do you think that there's some of that on the horizon, or is there any?
And that is a question that's going to get me stumped. I don't know. I thought I don't have a crystal ball. I thought I had some idea of what was going to happen during COVID, and built a thesis with, around the idea that COVID was going to start the recession or start some kind of real estate recession. And that didn't work.
Right.
And that, pumped a bunch of money into the system for a bunch of years. So I'm not sure I'm really good at looking at crystal balls. I think the partnerships that need to happen are going to just continue to be more and more important. And those are partnerships between cities and developers and public entities and private entities. I think that's going to be very important. I think partnerships between developers, quote unquote developers, and contractors is going to be really important, because those are getting to be so much more integrated and aligned that I think you'll see a lot of development companies starting construction companies, or construction companies starting development companies. I think that all of those, there's need for more and more efficiency in the way that we do business. And that's going to come across the board. It needs to have help from the public sector and figuring out ways to get things done faster. In my business, really what I say to people is, you can surely do real estate on your own. I have a consulting business where I help other people do real estate. You can do it on your own, but if you're not sitting there on a day-to-day basis, calling up the guy at the city and saying, hey, where's the permit?
Yeah.
It takes 2 years on a good day. If
Yep.
every single one of those million steps you take to develop a building, takes one extra day, you've just doubled your timeline.
Right.
And so it's just that constant need to keep at it. And I think that's again, that's something that's going to happen, but the ability to get through those processes a little bit easier from a municipality standpoint, financing standpoint, that kind of thing. Again, finding efficiencies is going to be the way that we can build the business better.
We talked about the future of development in general, but I'm curious about what you think the future of projects, the places and spaces that
Right.
you bring to life.
Yeah.
Having gravity been involved in that, and that was such a different concept versus a concept like this, which is more traditional and more common.
Yeah.
What do you think the future of space looks like?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Again, I'm not going to have a crystal ball, or else I would be rich and be on a boat right now. But I think there's a time and a place for each of them at the end of the day.
Sure.
This is an innovative project for where it is because it's
Sure.
super dense, it's urban, it's right close to downtown, but obviously it's a little bit more of a traditional suburban project than you'd see in downtown Columbus or even more urban areas. I think you mentioned Yogi, who's got a space downtown Columbus. I helped him acquire that building and go through some of his capital stack. And then you also had Rick Harrison Wolf
Yeah.
on the program. And both of those guys are doing unique things in terms of creating spaces for people that are overlapping between, recreation, and whether it's recreation and business, recreation and errands, whatever that may be. Those creative community spaces, I think, are going to continue to be more and more important downtown. And those are in super dense areas, just because as we get more and more people downtown, there's going to have to be places that we work and there's going to have to be places that we live, just because that's the way humans operate. But those third spaces, those other places for us to get around and be able to interact, I think are going to be really critical. We're sitting in an amenity space here, which we're hopeful can continue as the place leases up to be a place for people to connect and have those crossovers. But it's still a little bit TBD until we get some more humans in this space. But I think downtown, it's going to be, those third spaces are really critical.
So thank you for being here today and sharing your space and your story.
Yeah.
It's always good to talk to you, and you have your hands in so many different things.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks.
Curious, one of the questions we ask at the very end of every episode is, how would you define the Columbus way? Depending on the day.
That's like the $74,000 question. It's interesting. I mean, obviously we're sitting in Delaware, so it's a little bit of an interesting question to ask.
Correct.
I think that there's opportunity for, similar kind of opportunities like happening in Columbus can happen elsewhere outside of it. So I'll give a little bit of shout out for the, exurbs or the suburbs. I think the Columbus way has a time and place. I think there's an incredible opportunity for collaboration and partnerships within that organization. I also think that at this point, the city's big enough that we don't need whatever it is, 70 of the leaders of our city collaborating intentionally about things. We're big enough. There should be competition. There should be opportunity for other people to be at the table that one are not one of those 60, 70 leaders. And I think those folks can continue to do great work together. I don't think the city is big enough now that I think it needs to be a bigger room or a room with other people involved at other different parts of time. That said, as I said before, the public-private partnership collaboration is absolutely essential. It's going to be literally the only thing that makes good cities great. And so that's going to have to continue. I'm not entirely sure that the way that Columbus has gotten us to where we are now is going to be the same way that we get Columbus in the next piece. I relate Columbus very similar to a human being, although I don't have any of my own human beings. I have cats. But, this is Columbus. I feel like it's sort of in those teenage years where we're not entirely sure whether we want to be a musician or whether we want to be a sports star. We're not entirely sure whether we want to argue with our parents or sort of, take their lead. We're getting to that point that we got to figure out some of those things to be able to continue forward. And I'm not sure that the same way that we interacted with or, grew up through toddlership and through, being tweens is going to be the same as we grow into a bigger person. And so I think there's some opportunity there to make it better.
I love that answer. Thank you so much, Brian.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.